Chapter 5, Client Rights and Counselor Responsibilities. Okay, we're going to be covering a lot of topics, a lot of areas that you're going to be discussing with your client generally up front in terms of informed consent. And then we're also going to be discussing some of the paperwork that goes in behind sessions, progress notes. We're going to be talking about a little bit of standard of care, what your duty is as a helper, when to terminate a session, how you do that, what abandonment is, risk management, liability, those types of things. So this is kind of it's more of the daunting part of counseling, more of the tedious side of it, but it is a necessity for sure, because you're dealing with a lot of legal issues in this realm. So when we talk about informed consent, it's an ongoing process of informing the client about their treatment, their therapy, and that's targeted to help them make a decision pertaining to it. And the definition here, autonomous, which is a key word here that we definitely want to keep in mind, meaning that we want to make sure it is the client's decision, not our decision as the helper. All right, so everyone when they start treatment should have an informed consent document. So anyone that you do treatment with needs to sign an informed consent document stating specifically what type of treatment is needed for the condition they have, or what classification of diagnosis they have. They need to understand the duration of the treatment intervention. They need to understand the possible or the potential risks involved with this type of treatment. And they also need to understand that it is their right to choose whether or not they want to participate in the treatment. The APA has laid out guidelines for this. I'm trying to find it here. Yeah, it's actually in the beginning of your chapter. The American Psychological Association has laid out some specific areas that need to be covered in an informed consent document. So take a look at that because it is important. It's a legal document, and God forbid someone takes you to court as the helper for causing harm to them through this treatment. This document helps show the court that you did inform the client of the potential risks involved and the duration of the treatment, and that they are free to choose alternative treatment if they would like to do that. So it's an important document, and it also, I think for me, when I've used it in the past, it's helped establish kind of the foundation of the treatment. It also helps, I think, build rapport and trust because the client understands 100% of what the treatment is, what the potential risks involved are, and that he or she is perfectly able to go find other resources for their treatment. They don't have to stick with me. And so I think that conveys a positive message to the client that allows them to kind of trust the process and trust me as their helper. All right. The capacity, we may be dealing with clients that don't have necessarily the capacity to understand what informed consent is, or make rational decisions. So it's important that if we're working with a client with those types of disability, cognitive functioning disabilities, that they have someone that they trust that kind of oversees their maybe day-to-day functions, that person can explain it to them or can act on their behalf in some way, shape, or form. All right, voluntariness, which is what we discussed. Your clients can freely choose to have treatment done with you, or they can go somewhere else at any point during during the treatment. Now, there is a lot to cover in this chapter, so I'm just going to hit on some major points here. I'm actually just going to go down the list here of the key terms and hit on some specifics. The process of informed consent includes providing information about the nature of therapy, which we discussed, as well as the rights and responsibilities of both the therapist and the client. So the client is also going to have the expectations of them in this process as well, laid out. Right. So therapists, counselors, helpers have responsibilities to their clients and to also the agency that they work for as well. They also have we as helpers have a responsibility to a lot of different people, the community, even members of our own clients' families. A lot of people rely on counseling to help, and their families support them coming to counseling. And so sometimes there are ethical dilemmas that arise when there are conflicts among the responsibilities. For instance, let's say the agency's expectations conflict with the concerns or wishes of the clients. It's our responsibility that we address those and observe those and do our best to kind of mitigate those issues. Okay, so behavioral telehealth here. This is actually a way to consult. Generally, where we see this, at least in Wisconsin, where I've seen it, is with psychiatrists, because there's such a shortage of psychiatrists. And as licensed facilities, there are certain guidelines that the state of Wisconsin makes sure that clinics adhere to, and one of those is that you have some type of medical director for consultation, and some licenses require a psychiatrist on hand. And so telehealth is a way to do that, where there may not be a psychiatrist or a mental health professional in that particular geographical area, but they can call upon someone from a different area, and it's kind of like it's a video teleconferencing type system. All right, progress notes, of course, and process notes. Progress notes, every time you have a session with a client, you need to document what that discussion was about. And there are several reasons for that. The first reason is because you always need documentation of conversations you have, so that you can recall information when your client comes back in and you know what you guys are talking about. When you start getting into higher caseloads and you see a lot of people, it's going to be impossible to keep track of everyone's conversation. So it's imperative that you record notes on what you discussed, so that you can bring those up next time you discuss, and you can find out where you left off the next time you guys meet. It's also a kind of a cover yourself in a court of law, because if there's an issue that comes up where a client tries to take you to court over something, the court is going to want to see documentation that supports your side of things. And if you don't have progress notes and you have no documentation, then your side doesn't exist. It's basically your word against the client's, and if you have no documentation, you're going to get yelled at by the judge, because it's a professional expectation to have notation, and you're probably going to lose a lawsuit. So it's important that you have notation on every single one of your clients, what was discussed, how long you discussed it, or how long the session was, and then what your thoughts are about the discussion. There are different formats you can use for doing that. All right, and then there's also process notes, also known as what they call psychotherapy notes. And this is more or less client reactions such as transference, the therapist's subjective impressions of a client, and these can be kind of intertwined with progress notes as well, depending on what format you use. You're going to give your impression of where the client's at. All right, and then malpractice, I'm sure most people know what that is, but that is a very real concern in the helping professions. Anytime that you're working with clients and dealing with trauma or crisis situations, you've got to have, of course, insurance on hand, and most agencies will pay for that. But you also have to understand what your place is in the whole process. Your place is to help this person find their own solutions. Your place is to document everything that you discuss with the client. Your responsibility is to ensure the safety of the client and report it if they are making threats against themselves or others. And so you have a lot of responsibilities, and any violation of those responsibilities can open you up to liability. And that's one of the major things that we want to avoid, of course, in our practice. All right, then you have professional negligence, standard of care. So as you move forward in your career, your agency is going to define what standard of care is. For instance, if you work in an AODA clinic, people with a certain have a certain diagnosis may go through a specific type of treatment. They may go through a certain type of group service, and so that becomes your kind of standard of care. And there are more specific standards of care. There are more general standards of care. Professional negligence is when, well, right here, results from unjustified departure from usual practice or from failing to exercise due care in fulfilling one's responsibilities. Perfect example of this is if you read the prologue of the novel that we're currently reading, the Lying on the Couch novel. That is a perfect picture of professional negligence. The counselor or the therapist, the psychiatrist that was seeing the other psychiatrist and opening up about his sessions with his client and how incrementally he moved towards more unorthodox ways of working with that client. And he probably would have had a very, very difficult time justifying his thoughts and his processes and his manner of treatment to a colleague had he stepped away from the situation and sought some help. But that would be a perfect example of professional negligence. Duty exists when a therapist implicitly or explicitly agrees to provide mental health services. Breach of duty, which we kind of discussed already. Failure to take certain precautions. Breach of duty can open you up to malpractice and other issues as well with the law, and it could be detrimental to the client. That's number one. Injury falls in line with that as well. Causation, clients needing to demonstrate that a professional's breach of duty was a direct cause of the injury they suffered, which ties into process notes, documentation, informed consent document. The more documentation you have to back up and support your side, the better chances you have at coming out of something like that unscathed. All right, so that is Chapter 5. And if you have questions, concerns, as usual, get a hold of me. Otherwise, I will see you in the next learning plan.